Hey everyone, this is a review of the Bioshock series. Now, as with all my video game reviews, I'm going to do my best to not discuss spoilers too much. However, if I do have to talk about it, just keep an eye out for the words spoilers ahead coming up on the screen. With all of these reviews, I try to review them based on a couple of different categories: gameplay and mechanics, audio, graphics, story, and characters. With that, let's get started. So I finished this series about a year ago, I think. I started playing it, and I really liked the first one a lot. I liked the second one a lot, and I liked the third one okay, which seems to sort of be the general consensus, at least as far as I'm aware. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing the whole series in this review. I just figured it was easier rather than doing separate reviews for each game, especially since it's been a while since I played the first two. Good. Good. I tend to prefer third-person shooters over first-person, but, I mean, that doesn't mean I don't like first-person shooters by any means. And, this was done well. I liked the mix of using, real weapons versus, the more magical stuff. I liked, the way you see your hands. I don't know, I liked it. It looked cool to me. And how, you could have, fire in one hand and a gun in the other. It looked neat. So, yeah, it was all good, fairly basic for first-person games like that. With the exception of the third game, I did not like that you could only carry one weapon at a time. That was really annoying, and I hated it. Did not like. But other than that, the gameplay was fine. The mechanics were fine, Nothing bad, but nothing particularly special either. Good. Good. A lot of the music here was really cool, very fitting with the aesthetic they're trying to make. And a lot of the game relied on audio for its story, because you didn't interact so much with characters face to face until the third one. It was much more with the recordings they left behind, and it kind of added to the whole noir feeling of the first two games especially. And overall, it was pretty cool. It was fun. I don't necessarily think it was the most effective way to tell the story, but I'll get to that later. So yeah, the audio was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. In the third game, where they were used more voice acting, I mean, all the games use voice acting, obviously, but the third game was more interactive with the voice acting. It was quite good voice acting as well, so it was all good audio. Really good. And I don't mean in the sense that they were super realistic, because they really weren't, but it was just really cool looking, just visually stunning. All the different designs for things like the Big Daddies and the Little Sisters and the whole underwater world of Rapture itself, as well as the city floating in the sky in the third game, whose name escapes me at the moment. I can't remember what that city's called. But it was cool. It looked cool. And so visually, the games are really, really great. That's one of the strongest points of the series, in my opinion, is the visuals. Just how creepy they're able to make the atmosphere, especially in the first two games. And the third one, less so. But the visuals are still cool, and I did enjoy them a lot. So, really good visuals. This is where the games sort of start to fall apart, in my opinion. Which isn't to say that the story is necessarily bad in the first two games, and I have to clarify that by saying in the first two games. It's just pretty simplistic. I mean, in the first two games, you sort of play in everybody, you don't get to look at yourself, you don't, really have any lines, it's just supposed to put the player in the game more, which is fine. And the story surrounding it is a mix of interesting and not so interesting. In the sense that the world they've created is very interesting. All the Eve and Adam, the underwater city of Rapture itself, all the parallels to Ayn Rand, which just cracked me the hell up. Oh my god. all of that was very, very interesting, and a lot of the world building stuff was really, really cool. I liked that a lot, and that was good, but the characters were less so. It just didn't really have much of a focus on the characters, and for the story, that made it kind of lacking, in my opinion, because all the world building stuff was really cool, but there just wasn't any kind of connection to all of it, you know? And I mean, they did it to a degree, especially in the second game, you know, where they did give a little bit of an emotional connection there. But overall, they just didn't put that much emphasis on the characters, so I didn't really care about any of them until the third game. And so the third game is kind of where they switched it around, which is a little weird, where the world building and actual plot is a lot less interesting and makes less goddamn sense. And the characters are more interesting. Although mostly by characters I mean Elizabeth. Which isn't to say that I hated Booker or anything, and as I've mentioned before, I have a weakness for father-daughter relationships in fiction. So that aspect of the game I actually did enjoy a lot. But Booker himself, even though they added more to him and they made the point of saying that he's not a good person, kind of like Joel with The Last of Us, but not as well done, he just wasn't as interesting. Elizabeth was way more interesting, and that's, again, it's a point in the game's favor, but it's also kind of takes away from the game at the same time, because the fact is, you don't want to play as Booker. You want to play as Elizabeth. It's Elizabeth's story. It's her story all around, her character arc. More than anything else, Booker exists to support Elizabeth. And yet, she's not the main playable character, you know? And it just kind of feels ridiculous, because she should be. By all rights, she should be, you know? There's no reason for her not to be the main character, other than, well, honestly, in my opinion, sexism, especially in regards with the whole controversy of getting her on the back cover of the official box art. I mean, she should be the main playable character. She should be. It is her story all the way. But she's not, and that's really frustrating, especially because Booker is so much less interesting than her in comparison. And more than that, as much as I did enjoy the characterization of Elizabeth, and I did, don't get me wrong, she's a wonderful, wonderful character, the story still falls apart in terms of the plot. It just ends up making no goddamn sense. Spoilers ahead. Okay, so I'm gonna spoil the end of the game for you right off, as best as I can, even though to this day I can barely explain it because it doesn't make any sense, like at all. So basically, if you've played the game, you know that Booker has done a lot of horrible things, and he's gone up to this city in the clouds to try and erase some of his debt. And in this whole big plot twist, it turns out the debt he's supposed to erase by giving Elizabeth over to the bad guys is that Elizabeth is actually his daughter that he thought he lost all these years ago. And blah, 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 blah. That's all fine. That's all good. And with the whole world jumping that they have with them opening up the tears in reality that Elizabeth does, which on its own is cool, I just feel like they don't really use it to its full potential, or they try to, and then they fuck it up. Anyway, so Elizabeth finds all this out and figures it out before Booker does, and she leads him through these series of lighthouses and these different tears, very briefly getting a cameo of Rapture from the previous Bioshock games and all of that. And she takes him back to the point that was supposed to divide where these different worlds started. In one world, he went off and became this horrible, horrible man that started the city above the clouds. And in another, he, remained this private eye. And then in yet another one, he went off on this other path, and so on and so on and so forth. And she decides that the only way to stop all of these horrible things that he did as the evil guy Comstock is to kill Booker right here at this place where he made the decision. Except that this is where the story really, really starts to fall apart, because it's like the developers wanted to have this meaningful wow kind of twist of an ending that made you think, you know? Kind of like, again, with The Last of Us. I know it's not really fair to compare the two games because they don't honestly have that much in common, but that ending does, you know, leave you thinking and leave you unsure of what to feel. And I think that's the kind of thing they were going for with this ending, except they didn't really accomplish it because, again, it doesn't make any sense. I wish I had the timetable in front of me, but someone pointed out that if Booker was supposed to accomplish all this stuff and still be the age he is in the game, it would be basically impossible. And like he's supposed to have gone through the war when he was a teenager and like had Elizabeth when he was like 19 or something, and it just doesn't end up making any sense at all. It's just like so tightly compacted in terms of the timeline. And then like I don't really understand how Booker can exist in the same timeline and like nothing changed, you know. It's not like it was suddenly set in the future or something, but it's set in the same time, the same amount of time has passed, and yet he's an old man, you know, in the when he's Comstock. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And it also doesn't make sense that by killing Booker it would erase all of those other timelines because logically it shouldn't. It makes no sense that Elizabeth killing Booker would destroy all of the other timelines because we're shown in the game that you can go through to these different worlds and everything, but you know, I mean, just destroying one element doesn't mean that it's suddenly going to stop existing. And the whole point was that these places diverged when, you know, he made this choice. And so no matter what, those worlds are still going to exist. And it just, like, see me trying to explain it, I'm just trying to grapple with the logic here, and it doesn't work. It really doesn't. And after going through the whole game, it was kind of a letdown, honestly. And again, frustrating because they tried to do this focus on story and characters, and it feels like they just didn't do it enough. Like they didn't think it through enough, and that's just disappointing. And spoilers. So another thing I feel like I've got to criticize about this game besides the story is a couple of things that weren't handled super well in the third game in particular. Now, all three of the games don't have a lot of representation of any kind, like at all. You know, pretty much all the main characters are white, and there's no evidence of any of them being, you know, gay or transgender or anything like that. Which again, you know, doesn't automatically make the game bad or anything. It's just something that I wish would be there. But the third game is where it kind of gets worse. Like, a lot worse. I mean, for starters, the whole floating city is based on these people that, it's basically as if when the South segregated during the Civil War, or before the Civil War, or whatever, in the United States, they went up and they formed this place by themselves that's home to all of these horrifically sexist and racist ideals. And the horror of that is portrayed pretty well. You know, it's obviously shown to be in a bad light, but I also don't feel like it was really actively called out enough, you know? And I mean, again, the fact that there aren't any major characters who, you know, would be really adversely affected by that, aside from, I guess, Elizabeth, since she's a woman. There aren't, you know, any really main characters who are like that in the game, and so they're not able to really fight back against it, you know, in any meaningful way. And combined with the fact that no one ever really explicitly goes, this is wrong, you know, it just kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's not something I think the developers did on purpose, but that kind of, it doesn't make it worse, but that just shows again that it wasn't really something they considered, which just goes to show that, you know, they have privilege and they don't understand, like, why it would be important to point that kind of thing out, which is kind of sad and not good. And furthermore, well, this is one spoilery thing I do have to talk about, so spoilers ahead. Okay, so there's this resistance group in the game, right? The Vox Populi, and it's led by this woman whose name I can't remember. And she's a black woman, and she used to be a maid for Comstock, and she got framed for murdering his wife when Comstock really did it himself. And she's leading the Vox Populi against Comstock and starting this whole revolution. And the thing is, she's absolutely right, you know, to fight back against Comstock. And at first, Elizabeth is all gung-ho to be like part of the Vox Populi and fight back against Comstock and everything. And then as the game goes on, you see that the Vox Populi are, you know, willing to do some kind of atrocious things to get their way. And I don't have an issue with the game going that route and showing, you know, how harsh that kind of thing can be. But what I do have an issue with is the fact that after it's been revealed some of the horrific stuff that the Vox Populi has done, Elizabeth says that they are just as bad as Comstock. That is blatantly not true. And again, just really, really shows the privilege of the writers. I mean, here's a comparison of the Vox Populi versus Comstock, okay? Comstock started this city in the sky where he actively subjugates poor people, people of color, and women. Actively does that all the time. You know, he lets them get killed, he lets them starve. You know, the laws don't treat them fairly. They get beaten in front of people for entertainment. You know, that's something he actively endorses. Actively. You know? He indoctrinates children to believe these things. He specifically puts these laws in place that keep poor people from rising up and getting better lives. And, you know, his police force is, you know, just bent on hurting these people. And he keeps Elizabeth prisoner for years to try and groom her into the kind of leader that he wants her to be. You know, so that's just a taste of the things that he did as Comstock. And when he was Booker, he participated in a bunch of horrible stuff during the war, too. You know, so he's done a lot of horrible shit over the course of his life. The Vox Populi, in comparison, have existed for not only a much shorter period of time, but so far all they've done is fight back against Comstock. They fought back. And yeah, as time got on, their tactics got harsh. Like, I do not condone or excuse them killing, in particular, Mr. and Mrs. Lynn, you know, who were supporters of their cause. But they did it anyway, and that wasn't good. But the fact is, you know, they were still fighting back, and they had a reason to do it. You know, they weren't doing it just to be assholes. They were doing it because they'd been subjugated and pushed and oppressed for so long, and that kind of thing, you know, that's what it makes you do, you know? And it's completely understandable, and I don't understand why we're supposed to sympathize with a character like Booker, even if he is ultimately painted as not a good person. But we're not supposed to sympathize with the Vox Populi, and they get called as bad as Comstock. That makes no goddamn sense. At all. At all. And it's like, I heard this analogy once. I don't know who first said it. I think I read it on Tumblr or something. And it said that when a cornered mouse bites a cat, it does not suddenly become the predator. And it's absolutely true, not just in terms of this game, but in terms of larger oppression throughout the world, particularly things like the recent riots in Ferguson. And it's something that I think people really need to remember. Like, it doesn't justify hurting people, especially innocent people. But not only is that usually not what happens, but it's really unfair that we can do things like support characters like Booker, want him to succeed, or even characters like, say, Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games series. When they're fighting against an unjust regime, we can support them. But then when it's oppressed people fighting back, as soon as they do something that's even mildly on par as to what's been done to them, it's like, oh, that's just too much, that's going too far. It really shows, again, just how privileged a lot of people are, and that there is a serious double standard going on. And spoilers. Okay, so that's my review of the Bioshock series. I probably came out as a lot more negative than I intended to, because I did enjoy the series, even the third game. But I also don't think... It's not one of my favorite games, and there are way better games out there that have better story and all of that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to this review, and I'll see you next time. Bye.